Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. And with us this evening, I'll bring our guest on straight away, a familiar face to anyone who's a regular viewer or familiar with the Scottish Family Party, our chairman, Michael Willis. Welcome, Michael.
Yeah, hi, Richard. Good to be with you again after that long summer break.
Absolutely. We always have a good chat when we're on. We've got lots of interesting topics to discuss. I was saying to Michael earlier on, what sometimes happens with the live stream is I have a big list of topics and I pick out a few of them to put as the title of the live stream on YouTube and Facebook, etc. And then when I go through the live stream, I just pick topics at random off my list. Then I sometimes get to the end and find, actually, I didn't talk about the ones I put in the title. So I'm going to try and discipline myself to actually make sure we cover the topics that are actually in the title of the live stream. So that's what we're going to try and do tonight. I mean, do comment. Good evening, Anthony and Kate, getting the ball rolling with the comments. So do keep the comments rolling in. Just say we particularly appreciate abusive comments because it makes us look like the good guys, which we obviously are. But it just affirms to us that we're the good guys when people are sort of abusive and horrible in the comments. So if anyone's here of that mindset, I mean, do fire away because it, as I say, just makes us look good in comparison. So feel free to fire those comments in. Now, obviously, dominating the news has been the death of Queen Elizabeth, and on social media we've put out some contents, tributes, etc. But this evening with Michael, we decided we'd talk a little bit about the concept of monarchy a bit more in general, and about the way it can interact with some of the issues that we're interested in. So there's a bit more of a general discussion than particularly about Queen Elizabeth, but some interesting areas to address. I mean, Michael, do you want to kick off? I think you're the person who told me, first of all, about the incident with the King of Belgium a few years ago. Do you want to give us an outline of what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, my reaction to, I've got enormous respect for Queen Elizabeth, and she put in a massive shift. And because I come from a manufacturing background, and we talk about shift working, and she was constantly finishing these shifts. But I couldn't help, with her death, compare her to King Baudouin of the Belgians, who in fact is blood related, I think through the Saxe-Coburg line. So the King of Belgium, back in 1999, was confronted with an abortion bill, and this very holy and saintly king decided to abdicate rather than sign the execution bill, for countless future Belgian children. And sadly, and I can imagine the pressures placed on Queen Elizabeth, that when the 1967 Abortion Act was placed before her for royal assent, I mean, this must have been one of the saddest evenings in her life. She signed that bill, and of course, many people, and our party in particular, are trying to pick up those pieces and solve some of those problems, and eventually to overturn this act. So, despite all those shifts, I see that as a slight blight on her, on the work of her as monarch, and her leadership and her representation of the monarchy as an institution, because I think virtually every institution in this country has been attacked, and by the sort of the woke, the culture war, and the monarchy, despite massive problems that they've had within their family, she's been pretty robust and resilient, and has always bounced back despite all those problems. But I do see that. I don't know whether you take a different angle to me, Richard, but that must be the big blot on her copybooks, giving royal assent to that bill, and of course countless bills since 1967.
I'm not sure how the British Constitution would view that, where it would be even possible. And I can see what the King of Belgium was thinking there. It was a matter of conscience, and he just said, I will not sign this. I cannot sign it. And so they found a way around it. So he didn't stand in the way of the democratic process, but he made his own position clear. Now, I don't know if the British Constitution would even allow for that to happen. But first, on the one hand, had the Queen have done that, then I would have thought that was a really fantastic thing to do. On the other hand, though, does that not open the gate to future monarchs deciding for themselves which of their issues of conscience? Then we might have King Charles III saying, I cannot sign this bill allowing fracking for environmental reasons. I just can't in good conscience sign that. Now, I think whereas personally, I would admire a monarch who said, I'm not signing, a euthanasia bill or something like that. But then if one was saying, I'm not signing the one for fracking because it's damaging the environment, causing climate change, I'd be pretty annoyed about that.
Yeah.
I'd say, no, you're the monarch, you're supposed to be neutral. Now, so I suppose with the position of the monarch, if we allow them to exercise freedom of conscience, I suppose it does open the door to individual interpretation by every monarch. But on the other hand, freedom of conscience is very, very precious and should be protected wherever possible. So I think it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. I certainly wouldn't criticise the Queen or any member of the royal family for failing to do that. I mean, I admire the King of Belgium for doing it, but I wouldn't criticise any member of the British royal family for not doing that. But what you were saying about the Queen, I think it's true that she must have been under huge pressure to be endorsing, taking part in, appearing at, for example, a sort of LGBT campaigning events, just to endorse that in one way or another. And it seemed to me that she obviously basically wouldn't do that. She didn't say anything controversial, but it was obviously something that she wasn't comfortable with being seen to be endorsing. I think possibly with King Charles, but certainly with Prince William, that's going to change. They're going to be right on board with that. But I think with Queen Elizabeth, she sort of made a statement with silence on some of the other issues as well.
Yeah, she played a very straight bat, and certainly with something like LGBT rights, she really carefully avoided and steered her way around that particular minefield, and fair play to her. Didn't compromise the monarchy as an institution by doing that. And I take your point. I'm sure that came into consideration, that by taking a stance at abortion, and of course that is the sort of big 20th century issue. And I've got tremendous respect for King Baudouin, who of course was reinstated as monarch once the vote had been taken. Once the legislature had signed off on the bill, he was reinstalled as king. About a week later. So it was, some would argue that was a pretty sort of sneaky trick, but it did solve his conscience.
Yeah, and, I wouldn't see it as a trick. I would see that as a perfect solution, a solution to maintaining his sort of lack of influence over the affairs of state. On the other hand, preserving his own conscience and making what he thought was a vital statement. So I think that's a very noble chapter in history with the King of Belgium's behaviour on that occasion. So.
Yes, and I once saw him and his wife in Knokke, a holiday resort on the Belgian coast, and they were so well loved by the Belgian people, and a great model. And I know there's some talk about promoting him as a saint. Yes,
I've heard that. Yeah.
So, great respect, and I would say this outpouring of love and respect. I mean, it's so good to see this respectful behavior for the Queen and lying in state, and people lining the street, and a genuine, not a sentimental love, but a sort of genuine respect, I think, for her and the institution she represents. And very encouraging to see that. And we tend to be a bit sort of miserable about what's going on in the world, but what a lovely response and a sort of natural response, and so good to see respectful behaviour.
Yeah. But when I was watching the crowds, I often did this at royal events, some other events as well. Because at some events, crowds are a very dangerous and intimidating thing. And hundreds of people have been killed, thousands of people have been killed in crushes in crowds. And the automatic reaction now is the police obviously managed it wrongly. It was designed wrongly. It's the fault of the organisers or the supervisors somehow. No blame can possibly attach to any of the members of the crowd. They're automatically completely innocent. Now, of course, crowd management is obviously a science, I would imagine, now. And there is a responsibility on organisers, police, etc., to know what some sorts of crowds are like and to try and manage it as best they can. But on the other hand, I mean, what was the probability that anyone was going to be crushed to death while queuing up to see the Queen's coffin in St. Giles Cathedral? I mean, zero, because of the behaviour of the people, because of the mindset, the values, the demeanour, however you want to put it, of the people.
Yeah. And especially in Scotland with a strong Republican element, a strong nationalist element. Although the royal family are as Scottish as anything, often seen as an arm of England. But I haven't seen anything of that in the reports in the press, or not that I watch the BBC much these days, but nothing in the mainstream media.
I mean, the National embarrasses itself on every opportunity. The National newspaper, I mean, their sort of anti-monarchist front pages are something to behold. But there have been a couple of protests, Republican protests, and there's been controversy that some people have been arrested for holding placards up, for shouting, for trying to disrupt the events. And I understand the rationale for the arrest is breach of the peace. But what's your take on that? So, the Queen's coffin is being processed along the Royal Mile, and some fella in the crowd starts, hurling abuse at a member of the royal family or whatever.
Well, I'm sure it's the same. I'm sure it's the same as in your day. I mean, we were always taught to take our caps off, stand still and rigid by the side of the road when a funeral cortege passed. And at my old school, we used to have boaters, and you were expected to stand and wait for the whole cortege. And we're not talking about a royal cortege; we're talking about every day, because it passed our house at school, the cemetery. So, we had to stand to attention and not say anything and bow our heads in a gesture of deep respect. Yeah. And I know we're a party who likes to demonstrate and make a noise and get people to listen to us. But I would have thought this is taking it a bit too far at this sort of once in a 90-year, the whole century, nothing like this has happened. And perhaps that's a fair cop, a breach of the peace. I'm sure you have a different opinion to me, though, Richard.
I think it's a tricky one, because obviously you're not like, for example, a funeral, because what we're talking about here, it's not too dissimilar from going disrupting someone's funeral. I would say no matter what your view is or no matter what your issue, you haven't got a right to go and disrupt a funeral. You just can't do that. In terms of other events, is it the case that no matter what event you're organizing for, no matter what audience, people have got the rights to come and disrupt it? I would suggest not. Like if in a concert, say, if someone stands up in the middle of a concert and starts screaming and shouting, I mean, the sort of concert where screaming and shouting would spoil it, not be part of what was going on, then the police would come and take that person away, and they would quite rightly be charged. So it's not absolutely black and white, but I would feel that interrupting an occasion like that, a solemn occasion such as that, it's certainly, I think, the right thing for the police to take the person away, probably for their own protection, among other things. Where they should be charged, I would suggest very, very possibly. But the situation we're heading into here is some people are saying, that people should be allowed to disrupt and protest at so what's the equivalent to a funeral? But these are the same people who are saying you shouldn't be allowed to protest or make your presence felt in any way at all outside a facility where unborn children are killed. I mean, that really is a very strange position to adopt. But that's where we're heading to.
Yes,
with that.
Full of contradictions. I did want to say something that's partly to do with the royal family and this great institution. Was one of the sad things was I know 3 of her children divorced, and I think that was quite tough. But I like the way she kept that family together, and no matter what brickbats were thrown at them and what scandal emerged from those divorces, she obviously, her love of her children was the priority, and the love and protection of the grandchildren. But I was looking through my letters, my letters to the Telegraph, and one of them was about Prince William going on holiday together with his future wife and proposing on the holiday for her hand in marriage. And one of the members of the Scottish Family Party in Stirling did send me a note on this about the problem about living together. And I often think it's the thrust of his note to me in the research was that couples who live together in fact have very unsuccessful marriages. And the common sense view is that live together and test out the vehicle, your future wife or husband, see what they're like. And that's a proper sensible pragmatic approach to marriage. But he sent me these figures that those couples who live together and eventually tie the knot have a divorce rate nearly 80% higher than those who waited until after the wedding to move in together. So It's this whole thing about preparation for marriage leads to better marriages, and so this sort of modern view that it's sensible to spend this time together and never really commit. Nobody commits, and you find them getting married sort of 10 or 20 years later. And I'm not throwing any brickbats at anyone, but the research seems to suggest you're better off marrying and not going through this sort of preparation period. And he also, this fellow who sent me a link to a website saying, living together hides the reality of it. And I suppose from a biblical point of view, we used to call that fornication, and that word's never used. So better preparation, better marriages. And another thing that came up was women, when they marry, they always expect the man to change. And men, when they marry, expect the woman not to change, which I think is a great saying. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside, and it sprung from
that's interesting. That little phrase at the end about the changing, I hadn't heard that one before. I'd have to think about that one. But the cohabitation thing, there's a mountain of evidence supporting that. Relationships are most stable where the couple move in together and have sex for the first time when they get married. And my understanding of why that's the case is because marriage ties together the 3 aspects of domesticity, living together, commitment, permanent lifelong public commitment, and sex. It binds those all together into one package. And so maybe particularly in the man's mind, whenever he thinks about the marriage, he thinks about those things as all being part of one package. So if there's a frustration in one of the areas, then you can't just go and seek one of the things in other places, because it's part of a package deal, if you like. And I think just the nature of the relationship changes substantially with marriage, because before marriage, the understanding is, well, this is provisional. I'm going to see if it's suited me at the moment, this relationship, but I'll have to see if it's suiting me next year, and I'm not sure. So that makes people a bit on edge, but uncertain, trying to impress the other person, maybe a bit more reluctant to be honest, maybe less willing to tackle difficult issues. If you're a bit worried, they might say, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, let's just give up and leave it. Whereas with a married couple, they feel there's a more solid foundation, so you can tackle more difficult issues, and you're not so worried the other person's going to say, oh, well, stuff it, I'll just leave. So, yeah, but the evidence is overwhelming on that. Now, as far as the Scottish Family Party, I mean, in some countries, probably in like Afghanistan or something, it's illegal to have sex before you're married. We don't want any policy remotely like that. But I do think within school, pupils should learn about these facts, about the outcomes associated with different life choices. Because stability of relationship in adult life, that's a very, very big factor in someone's life journey, isn't it? I mean, if that goes wrong, that's a big deal. I'm not saying that person's life's completely ruined or whatever, but it's a very big deal, big factor in their life trajectory. So advice that relates to that, I think, is absolutely crucial. So they could cut out teaching about some things I'd rather not even mention and include vital facts like that. So, yeah, I absolutely agree with the person who wrote to you about that.
Yeah.
A couple more things on the monarchy front. This is one of my thoughts. Now, when I think things up for myself, I normally find someone else has actually thought them somewhere else, but I've just thought this off my own bat a bit recently. Often with leadership positions, there are quite involved processes to determine who enters into the leadership position. You either have a selection process and panels, or they go through various ways of assessing their capabilities, or they get elected. So really involved systems to try and make sure you get the right person in the top job. But then with hereditary monarchy, you just take the next person that comes up and you give them the job. It's like a fascinating experiment, isn't it? Of putting someone in the top job that hasn't been through any of these selection processes that are normally thought to be absolutely vital. I think it's just, it's I like looking at a fascinating experiment. But then on the other hand, what qualities do you really need to be a good monarch? You don't need to be brilliantly intelligent. You don't need a fantastic sense of humor. What do you need? Basically, it's character qualities. You need to be humble. You need to be dutiful. You need to be genuinely concerned about people. You've got to behave responsibly in your family relationships. You mustn't spend too much of your time just being a playboy, just off doing your own thing, having fun. You've got to have the commitment to the duty. But all those things, they're character qualities. So they're things really that anyone could show. And I mean, not looking at the history of the monarchy, certainly recently, most of them seem to be able to do that, partly because I think they're brought up into it. I think if we picked someone at random, like instead of the Queen, if they'd have just picked a random, how old was she, 23 or whatever, I can't remember. If they just picked a random, 25-year-old and said, right, you're the king or the queen, then that could well have been a bit of a disaster because they wouldn't be ready for it. They might be flippant or inappropriate, or they'd make faux pas at a lot of opportunities. But being brought up in the royal family and being prepared for it, then I think in a sense, the respect that you receive is because of the position. And if you've been injured at some terrible disaster and the monarch comes to your bedside and says hello and expresses some concern, or comes to visit the project you're involved in and says, oh, well done, I think you're doing a great job, people inevitably just feel really honored. And they're so pleased that the embodiment, the representative of the nation, has come to them to express this appreciation or this concern, that it's quite natural for them to think, oh, what an absolutely amazing person that is. Whereas actually, I think lots of the Queen was a really a great character in lots of ways. But people are going to tend to feel that regardless of the character of the person. I mean, if I'd been the king, for example, people would be saying I've got all sorts of fantastic qualities, but because I did the job. It's just that's the natural response to people because they project their feelings onto the person, onto a judgment of the character of the person, whereas actually what they're feeling is because of just the position and what they're representing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And then, of course, when we look at King Charles, I mean, he's an individual who, unlike his mother, has had a significant induction program. And slightly worryingly, I gather Tony Blair took him under his wing to sort of train him in in what goes on between Prime Minister and the Crown.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just got a slight uneasy feeling that he'll find it very difficult to pull back totally and to be totally independent and to forget his sort of environmental stuff and show true deference to the position of the Crown and continue in his mother's steps. So I've got a bit of a worry about him, and he's been the best trained. As you say, his mother was just chucked into the job, no training whatsoever, and probably wanted a backroom life. I suppose a bit like her sister, Princess Margaret. You make some some good points, and it really is the institution, isn't it? If it's not too sullied, if you keep protecting the institution, don't let too much light come in on the institution. Try and keep it as private as possible. There is a great love for the individual that performs that task, and as you say, standing by a hospital bed or supporting your project or turning up at the opening of a factory, it has fantastic benefits. And if someone like Nicola Sturgeon turned up, or Macron, I mean, what a difference. You don't want them.
No,
you want this sort of magic, the magic of royalty.
Yeah, I think just in a word of defence to, I want to say, Prince Charles, King Charles, with the environmental things, because it's not clear cut what's a controversial political issue and what's not. Because whatever viewpoint you're going to express, even if it's something, that would be, 99.9% of people would say, yeah, that's obvious. There's always going to be some people who say, no, I don't agree with that. And so if the monarch restricted them to only saying things that 100% of the population regarded as uncontroversial, then they really wouldn't be able to say anything at all. They wouldn't be able to visit a single charity, or they'd be completely silenced. So there's always going to be a bit of a grey area between what's a controversial political issue and what's not. I suppose with climate change, if you've got an issue where all the parties in all of the parliaments in the whole of Britain are more or less saying the same thing, then maybe it's forgivable that to some extent the monarch can, in the most general terms, express support for that opinion. Would you agree with that? Or another one, a more controversial one, would be like LGBT things, because again, accepted by, if you look at the Scottish Parliament, say, by every party, that philosophy is accepted by every party in the Scottish Parliament. So therefore, is the monarch on safe ground thinking, well, this is not politically controversial?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult to tread a path for King Charles, but I mean, I get the impression that his son will sort of carry his bags, in that area about what to do about so-called man-made global warming. But I mean, I just hope his training and the fact that he is a diplomat, that he will, just change the way he operates, on his installation.
Yeah, time will tell.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at some comments. Right, Charles. Thought it would be impossible for the Queen to insist on a referendum. I'm not sure that is constitutionally possible. I'm not sure the Queen's got the power. I think a lot of these questions to me, it comes back to the fact that whatever system you've got in place, no matter what checks and balances, it can go wrong if you've got the wrong people in the place. Like some people look at the Catholic Church and say, you see, it just shows if you just have a monolithic organization, then you can stay on the rails. Other people say, no, you need to be constantly reforming to stay on the rails. But the strengths and weaknesses in each, and same with any sort of constitutional system, you can put in checks and balances, but if the wrong people with the wrong values are in the positions, then it goes wrong. Answer, we've talked about that. Right, Jason, let's deal with this. UK is for white Christians. I don't know what you mean by that. I don't understand. So if someone's a Christian, then they lose their faith. The UK ceases to be for them. So I really don't understand what you mean by that. Do you mean that someone who loses their Christian faith should move to a different country? Or that people should only be allowed to come into Britain if they're white Christians? So the UK is for white Christians. I don't regard that as the truth. I don't understand what you mean by it. So you can maybe have another try to explain what you mean by that and what its implications would be. Demonstrations are okay, but not at a funeral. I would agree. I think there's maybe some other occasions as well where demonstrations are not appropriate. There's a time and there's a time and a place for protest during a funeral procession. Is neither time nor the place. Yes, I would agree. It's interesting. We don't see many Republican protesters at other times when the royal family are around. Is that right, Michael? Have I just been missing those, or have they just come out of the woodwork for the?
Well, I don't think they get an awful. There may well be, but they certainly don't get very much coverage.
That's a good point, actually. They've got plenty of coverage this time. It's only often been a handful of people, and yet, it's one of the front page of the website BBC Stories. Because I think that reflects maybe the BBC's point of view a little.
Yeah, I mean, I gather on social media that chip shop in the Highlands that her social media post was very derogatory, and then her chip shop got pelted with eggs and ketchup, and someone said you'd never sell another chip in the village. So your point about the police taking people away for their own protection when they make these sorts of comments or demonstrate is probably the police being very very sensible and a proper regard for public order.
Yeah. The young chap who started shouting on the Royal Mile, a member of the public grabbed him from behind and yanked him pretty hard, and he went flying. And I would imagine that member of public wasn't thinking, "Oh, I'd better make sure he doesn't hit his head on something when he falls over backwards." Right, John. Pledge protest not appropriate. I think it's just the context. It's the context. I think with a personal funeral, no matter what someone's opinion of the issues or politics or whatever, it's not an appropriate place to be making your views. And I also think people have got the right to conduct events free of disruption as well. To some extent, there's a bit of a grey area there, because sometimes what happens, people try to stage an event and it can't go ahead because people come and disrupt it and protest. So if you imagine, for example, a church service, this has happened in some cases, protesters come in, just make a big noise, stand at the front and prevent the service from going ahead. Now, I think it's quite right in that situation that you can call the police. In fact, it doesn't matter what sort of meeting it is. If someone's preventing you from conducting your affairs in some sort of way, then there's a role for the police. Agile provocateurs can be used to justify a draconian reaction of curtailing free speech. Yes, that is true. Yeah, generally restrictions on freedom of speech are encouraged, or that they go along incrementally in response to some particularly egregious cases. I would agree with that. Marriage by habit and repute. Common law marriage, as it was, which apparently, I think I heard recently, there's never been any such thing legally. It's just a phrase that's existed in the language. Doesn't always work. If we're talking about the cohabitation issue, no, of course, I mean, just in general, that's the result. Right there, Fraser, yeah, we're good.
Because we were both disappointed, weren't we, when the marriage allowance, which has always been our policy, should one of the spouses can take the full allowance.
Yes.
And I see Liz Truss has said that part of her manifesto when she was competing for the prime ministership, that she agrees with that. But then she went on to say that's not for married couples, that's for anyone cohabiting. And, as we said, the research seems to indicate that doesn't help at all in terms of stable marriages and a good basis, for children. But that's,
I wasn't aware that she said that. Yeah. That she'd backpedaled and said it wasn't just for married couples.
Yeah, it's if anyone living together can benefit from this this change in the tax allowances.
Well, that's classic conservatives, isn't it? They put forward something that is actually a conservative policy, but when it gets criticised from a progressive point of view, they collapse. I mean, the Scottish Parliament, there are people who openly argue that if you treat married people differently, you're discriminating against people who are not married. To which I would say, well, they could get married if they wanted to. It's their choice whether they get married or not. But the very widespread thing, it's an equality issue, and you're discriminating if you treat married couples in any different way, which the family party we completely disagree with. The government encourages people to behave in certain ways in 1,001 ways, and they're all completely uncontroversial until it comes to family life, where suddenly there's a taboo. And the choices that result in the best outcomes, particularly for children, you're just not allowed to try and encourage those, because somehow or other, family life's different from every other aspect of life. It's the one area where the government can't try and play a positive role in producing a healthier society. So, yeah. I'll just say on those issues, the family party, that's really at the heart of the family party manifesto. But in terms of communicating to people, it's not the first thing people often latch onto and say, oh, yeah, I get really excited about that vision. Yeah, I think those family policies are really brilliant. That's the way the way forward for Scotland. There's a relatively small number of people who are drawn to the party by that. They might be drawn to us by other issues that are a bit more spicy, shall we say. But then hopefully as people come into the party and get more involved, they'll start to take on board that wider vision as well for family life. You guys are banjos. Right, I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult. Well, so you can maybe clarify for us that one. Right, the World Economic Forum. Well, that's a good link, because that's something else on my list. Why don't we move on to that now? My personal opinion on this is what Michael thinks in a minute. The World Economic Forum is a sort of soft left-wing, sort of progressive, sort of talking shop. It seems to be quite influential among the world's leaders. I wouldn't want to overplay its influence. I don't think it's like the secret hand behind all world affairs, but it is significantly influential. And I absolutely agree that King Charles needs to distance himself from it completely and utterly, because it is a politically motivated group. And if he can't see that, then I think we've got quite a serious problem there. Well, hopefully his advisors will tell him that. But all being well, he'll be well clear of that in the future. I'm sure you'll agree with me on that one, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I did see his speech, which I think it was in Charles' neck of the woods. That stately home he's reconditioned down in the Borders.
Yes.
Sorry, slightly to the west. I forget the name, but he gave this speech with World Economic Forum logos in the background, and it was the usual stuff about resetting the economy and what a great opportunity we have now to build back better and all this stuff. And I mean, I see WEF as it's not in the background. They're totally transparent about what they're up to. They do train global leaders, but the very fact they're globalist, of course, is a threat to Scotland. We want the best interests of Scotland in the United Kingdom. We don't want global policies and sort of planning and the management of the world economy taking over our country without us approving it, through the ballot box and being aware of this. So any global organization which seeks to impose its will on us, whether secretly or openly, which is not through the democratic process, is a grave threat. And yes, of course, he should disassociate himself from the World Economic Forum. But there are so many. I mean, I think Liz Truss, I think she's been educated and been on some of their training programs. I mean, everyone has bought into the development goals. The whole governance of every major corporation in the world is influenced by this agenda, and so it's very, very powerful. It's threatening, and it certainly doesn't align with us at the Scottish Family Party, who want what's best for the families of Scotland, and doesn't want this lot interfering in our affairs.
Yeah, I think the pushback is growing, and I think their genius is to present themselves as just visionaries trying to solve the world's problems, whereas actually they're politically there's a definite political agenda there. I mean, that's the genius of many progressive, left-wing organizations as well, is they somehow are not perceived as being political. Whereas when you and I probably look at them, we think, well, they quite obviously are, but the media, the mainstream, tend to treat them as if they're non-political. Now, just out of interest, I think Elizabeth Leslie, I don't know if you're watching, Elizabeth, sent this to me the other week. It's very interesting. This is the World Economic Forum, and it's their analysis of the role of faith in addressing key global challenges, religious faith. Now, my first thought to that, I don't like the idea of secular organizations telling religions what role they should play. I would prefer to hear religious organizations speaking into politics rather than politics speaking to religious organizations. Now, to be fair, they list a lot of positive contributions that religious groups can make, but listen to some of the problems associated with religion, according to the World Economic Forum. Unwillingness to change. In other words, unwillingness to come into alignment with their beliefs. In other words, denial of the value of this life and focus on the next. So they criticize religious people because of their focus on the life to come. Well, exploitation in the name of religion. Well, yeah, sort of okay. Age discrimination and neglecting the dignity of children. Age discrimination. Now, again, that's like the children's rights idea. You've got to treat children the same as adults. And that leads to some quite concerning conclusions. Another problem with religious believers, if you like, according to the World Economic Forum, is they have apocalyptic views of this world's future. I think, hang on, apocalyptic views, that's all the rage at the moment. That's the mainstream. The mainstream is to have apocalyptic views of the world's future. But apparently they say religious people are worse for that. Theocentrism, in other words, well, belief in God, basically, which can lead to fatalism. So you don't care about the world's problems. I don't think that's true. Another problem with religion, they say, is traditionalism and conservatism. I mean, how blatant can you say it? So they're not political, of course, but the problem with religious people is that they're conservative. It'd be talking about their moral values and their cultural values, and traditionalism. Is traditionalism a problem? I think there's a vast amount of tradition that's hugely positive, and it's been a disaster for Western society that's been lost. But the World Economic Forum says that religious people promoting traditionalism, that's a problem. That's one of the problems with religion that we need to overcome. Got a couple more. Violent resistance against certain practices such as birth control and vaccinations. Well, we're going to talk about vaccinations a bit later. So basically opposing abortion. The problem with religious people and religious organizations is they oppose abortion. I mean, violent resistance, that's just nonsense. But they just mean resistance. So the problem with you religious people is you oppose abortion. So it's the World Economic Forum. Well, yeah, they're very welcome to their opinion, but religion can be a source of conflict and division. Yes, as can lots of other things as well. Yeah, there's a few others, but that gives you the drift. So they see themselves as in the sort of moral supervision capacity. So they're looking down on the world. They can see everything else relative to their superior values. And they can look at religious believers and they can judge religious believers from their higher plane and see what's good and bad about them, which I would tend to say, how dare they think they can do that?
I mean, it's like a totally humanistic agenda, isn't it? A humanistic, materialistic agenda versus the spiritual side of man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So with the World Economic Forum, I haven't paid a huge amount of attention to it, but the more I look into it, the more I find, I just think, it's just politically and culturally biased, and I disagree with a lot of its underlying philosophy. So that would be an interesting test case for King Charles III.
Yeah.
See if he distances himself. I've also got a paper they produced about education. I won't go through that now. I'll save that for another week. And maybe talk about that next week. But it's fascinating to read their vision for education as well. Now we've got one last topic for us to actually cover the topics in the title for once before we get sued for Trade Descriptions Act or something. I saw a report in the paper recently about births and deaths in Scotland. The last year I'd seen figures for it, this is one of the statistics I'd remembered. It was 58,000 deaths, 53,000 births. So a gap of 5,000 and then 13,000 abortions. So if all the babies that were aborted had been born, then the Scottish population would have been growing. But as it is, the population was shrinking, 5,000 a year. But I got an update the other day, and the last year we've got records for. This is 2021. 63,500 deaths, not 58,000. 63,500 deaths, and only 48,000 births. So that gap between the number of deaths and the number of births has extended pretty dramatically there, Now, the Scottish government's concerned about population decline. They haven't got a clue what to do about it, apart from providing fertility treatments for single women to produce more fatherless children. But overall, they haven't got a clue what to do about it. But the situation is becoming a lot more grave, looking at those latest figures. But the reason I brought those up is that there is a worldwide phenomenon at the moment of excess deaths. So basically more people are dying than would have been expected for that profile of population. Now, this is going to be a bit like playing taboo here, because if you say the wrong thing on YouTube, then you're breaking their terms of service and they will shut your channel down or give you strikes or whatever. So we're going to have to be very careful what we say here. But I think in Britain it's about 1,400 people a week extra are dying above what normally would have been expected. I'll give a bit more background on this before Michael can come in as well. So after COVID, one would have expected that a lot of the more frail and vulnerable people would have succumbed to COVID. So the remaining population you would expect to be the more robust section of the population. So you'd have expected mortality to be down a little bit, that there would have been less deaths than would have expected. But actually, there are significantly more. So what could the explanation for this be? One explanation, well, it might be a combination of things. It might not just be one thing, or it might be none of these things, but these are the three that generally are being considered. Is it after effects of lockdown? Is it failure to diagnose illnesses earlier during lockdown, or the delays in the NHS or health systems around the world? Or is it the effect of lockdown had an effect on people psychologically, and this is affecting their physical health? So that's one possibility. It's an after effect of lockdowns. Another possibility is it's a long-term result of COVID. So this is generally people who've had COVID are then more susceptible to other serious health conditions. And the other possibility is, this is where we play taboo a little bit, is that some of the medical interventions given to millions and millions of people in response to COVID, actually, some of them might be having effects that are negative on people in the longer term. Now, I've given those three things. There might be other factors as well. It might be a whole mixture of them. Who knows? But they seem the three obvious ones to look into. And my main point I'd like to make here is that this should be a really big issue, and there should be a lot of effort going into trying to pin down exactly what's happening here. Because the data to answer these questions is surely there, and it would be very helpful if this was being looked at professionally, being made public, so that we could all try to understand what's going on. I mean, my position personally, I'm certainly not someone who's been particularly skeptical of medical responses to COVID, but I just think with the situation we're in now, the onus is on the governments around the world and international organizations as well to be open and look into this issue and try and work out what's happening. But were you aware of this as well, Michael?
Yes, I mean, I've seen a lot of reports coming in from all over the world with the same trend, and certainly in some of the most highly vaccinated countries, some of their reports are quite startling. So it's a common trend, and that deviation, it's an average of the last 5 years compared to the current year. I mean, it's a real black hole about what's causing this. And then we've seen this sort of, I don't know what they're calling it. Is it sudden death syndrome, where young people are just collapsing and dying?
The excess deaths are spread across all age groups.
Yeah,
that seems to be what the data is showing.
Okay. And it just reminds me, I mean, right at the beginning of the of this pandemic, some politicians and many lobbying groups were saying, look, can we have a cost-benefit analysis of introducing this program? And if you remember, they never, ever produced it. And one of the costs was likely to be effect on children who couldn't attend schools or could attend schools and were masked and couldn't actually communicate effectively. There was a cost to the economy, and we're starting to, our problems now is not the war with Ukraine. It's our problems are, the carpet bombing of our economy, and everything just shut down, and the supply lines just are struggling to get back. And our policy has always been, don't put debt into the hands of our children and our grandchildren, and this is what we've been doing right through this epidemic. So right from the very beginning of this, there were voices asking, let's be a bit more rational about it. We've got these excess deaths. It does seem strange. We're not getting enough. We're not getting enough analysis. We're not getting enough coverage of this. But it's just starting to creep through. And the one thing, they are not cheating on the statistics. The Office for National Statistics, they are not being changed, and we're getting the figures, but no one's giving us the analysis. And of course, all these injuries that have been caused by these interventions, the number of registered injuries and deaths is starting to rise. And of course, everyone who does sustain an injury or a death, the maximum payout's 120,000, and they've just started to make their first payments. But the backlog is enormous, and I think they're deliberately dampening that down and trying to keep kicking all of this into the long grass, so that when we finally do get the Royal Commission into this, what exactly went on and what's really happening to people now, that the perpetrators, might escape justice.
Yeah,
if they can. Does that make sense, Richard?
Yeah, I think I maybe wouldn't use the word perpetrators, but I think the poverty issue you raised there was very interesting. That went a bit beyond the causes I said as well. With poverty, in a sense, a lot of people are facing financial difficulties, and generally, if you've got any sort of worry in your life, it tends to affect your physical health. So that is going to be a cause of physical health problems as well. But as you said, during the lockdowns, these longer-term considerations were just completely ignored. Now, I made a video right at the beginning of coronavirus. I said, right, the governments have got a really difficult job to do here. If information is incomplete, nothing can be tested perfectly, there's going to be difficult decisions to make. And you can't necessarily judge a decision by its outcome. And my little illustration with that was, if you're driving in Scotland, and one person said, right, you see that blind bend ahead? I'm going to drive round in the left-hand lane, because you drive on the left in Scotland. And someone else might say, nah, I'm going to drive round really fast on the right. Now I would say to the person who's going to drive around on the right, okay, no, that's really stupid. You should drive on the left. But then when they go and do it, it might be that as they go around the corner, they happen to come across some American driving on the wrong side of the road. So the person on the left has an accident and's killed or whatever, and the person on the driving on the right was okay. Now after that, you wouldn't say, oh, you see, you gave them the wrong advice. You see, you should have said to him, you should drive on the right. So sometimes in an uncertain situation, even if someone makes what overall might be the most sensible, rational decision, it still might not work out for the best. So I would encourage, I suppose that would be a message I'd have for the governments, maybe for medical professionals as well around the world. If it is the case that maybe some decisions are not working out as well as you hoped, or they're working out negatively, doesn't necessarily mean that it was the wrong decision. Maybe on the balance of probabilities, that was the right decision on the basis of what was known now. But just be open about it now. Let's just look at it openly. Let's find out what's gone on, which shouldn't be too difficult, looking at people's medical records to see which groups of people are most affected in these excess deaths. So I just think as we're both saying, I just think openness and rigorous analysis is needed, and it should be a serious story worldwide and in Scotland as well.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll come back to this this story again, Richard, as we get more information. And it's just it's such a shame that the mainstream media are still tending to suppress these stories, but it seems to be gathering momentum, and questions are being asked. So there's one very brave man in the House of Commons who keeps pushing away on the Tory party side, and we hope more people will rally around his flag.
Yeah. Well, miraculously, we have actually covered the topics in the title as far as I'm concerned. We've done what it says on the tin for once in the live stream. So, Michael, it's been a pleasure to speak to you as always, and to hear your thoughts and to interact with some of the comments as well. So thanks for watching. Thanks for your comments.
Thank you.
Just mention, I meant to mention this at the beginning. The Scottish Family Party Conference this year is in Dunfermline, and it is on the 12th of November, Saturday, the 12th of November. He said, just checking his diary to make sure that's the right date. Yep, Saturday, the 12th of November. So put that in your diary. It would be great to see you. There's the conference in the daytime, and then as an optional extra, there's a meal in the evening as well. It'd be great if you could join us for the conference or for the conference and the dinner. So, right, thanks everyone. Thanks, Michael. I will see you next week. Good night.
Good night.